All right, so did you want to begin, Mark?
Absolutely. I'll kick things off. So again, apologies everyone for this morning's technical difficulties, but I'm glad we all got there in the end. So thanks again everyone for taking the time to join us today. This webinar will be recorded, so if you have colleagues that weren't able to join, we'll be sharing the link after the webinar, and we'll also send out a Flex MSE product sheet with that as well for more information. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you've got questions during Dylan's presentation, pop them into the Q&A section and we'll get to try and answer those, as many as we can at the end of the session. So let me kick off with a quick round of intros. My name is Mark Jarvis. I'm head of marketing at Arbor Green. I'm joined by my colleague Liam Oates Willis, and he's marketing coordinator. He's the one that's been working behind the scenes trying to get this whole webinar organized. He's done a fantastic job. Our guest speaker today, who will be delivering the presentation, as you've met already, Dylan Armour, who is General Manager of Flex MSE. Arbor Green has partnered with Flex MSE since 2021. And we've had a great partnership with them. We're passionate about the product that we're going to learn about today. And Arbor Green is known for our commitment in getting the best project outcomes for our customers. And we credit that success to our adaptability, innovation, and key industry and product partnerships like Flex MSE. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dylan. Dylan, welcome.
Thanks very much, Mark. I appreciate it. And I know we've got a little bit less time now, so I'll do my very best to whip through this and still provide a good overview, essentially, of it. And from what Mark said, there's a fair bit of a variety of clients on the line today, so contractors as well as potentially some designers as well too. So I'll do my very best to address the different kind of stakeholder interests. So Flex MSE has been on the market globally since 2003. So we're manufactured in Canada. We're also manufactured in the US, and we also manufacture in Europe as well. So we started in British Columbia, and primarily starting in the residential market. That's kind of one of our biggest markets here in North America. But since then, we've branched also into various infrastructural projects. We're actually specified on the UK's HS2 project, which is a really large high-speed rail project. NZTA has also used us on New Zealand highways projects. So we're definitely used in a variety of different sectors. So we're not just landscaping, we're not just infrastructural as well too. We also do erosion control as well too, which we'll talk a bit as well. The two components are basically the Flex MSE geotextile bag and our patented Flex MSE interlocking plate. The system is always installed at a one-to-one relationship with these two components. So if you're ordering, let's say, 500 square feet of wall, typically we attach a contingency to that. So you're ordering about 600 units, and you're going to get 600 Flex MSE bags and 600 Flex MSE plates, and they're always installed at that one-to-one relationship. The bag is made from a proprietary non-woven material that we have manufactured specifically for our system. It's UV stabilized to twice the industry rate, which is great for obviously in areas like New Zealand and also Australia with high UV. And it's paired with that interlocking plate, which is 100% recycled polypropylene. And that gets us to about 50% recycled material by mass. So if you're working with any stakeholders, including municipalities or other owners that are looking for a green system, this is definitely one of the really nice advantages. As far as what goes in the bag is we want to make sure we're getting a high quality structural and growing media directly in the unit, because this is a vegetated system. I always tell people we're not selling a black bag system, we're selling a vegetated system. So you want to make sure you're not only satisfying the structural components and getting the weight that you need in that unit and also the drainage, but you're also getting a high quality organic amendment in there. So typically what we do is we mix it at a ratio of 2 parts clean fine sands mixed with 1 part compost. And then that gets us to around sort of 3 to 5% organic matter, which is enough to sustain vegetation, but also enough to not have any long-term compression or any kind of loss of medium. So we have a nice stable growing medium. As far as the similarities between us and a concrete system, there's a lot of similarities in the way that we're constructed between a concrete block. So similar to what we would call an alum block or keystone. although I believe Keystone's patents lapsed, so they have plenty of knockoffs everywhere, but we perform exactly the same way. So we're installed like a segmental system, so we're stacked typically, especially when we're doing a reinforced scenario like a slope or a wall. And the bags basically form an offset running bond, very similar to like you would see in a concrete block wall. And it's really important for that lateral strength going across the wall. And then basically our plate bridges the unit, bridges the joint, as opposed to something like mortar or like a pin or whatever else. That's our mechanical connection between the facing and also the reinforcement. And then that plate bridges the joint between the gap between all the bags. And then that's replicated hundreds and thousands of times throughout the wall. And it basically forms a mechanical connection, like I said, in between the units, but also in between the actual geosynthetic reinforcement. So this is a really critical point from geotechs, because they also want to see a mechanical connection between the facing and the reinforcement. Once you start getting into sort of finishes and whatever else, obviously concrete has a variety of finishes. Ours is always vegetation. So of course our running joke is if you want to green up a concrete wall, you can always paint it. But with Flex MSE, the vegetation is not only an aesthetic component to it, but it's also part of the long-term stability. So we want to make sure that we're paying good attention to the best practices around vegetation as well. Getting into some of the differences and some of the things that really make us unique to many other systems on the market is that the same two components can satisfy any design angle. So in a reinforced scenario, what this typically means is that a 45 all the way up to 85, or a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-10. So we can satisfy any of those design angles, and we can create any slope and any batter in any shape. So as opposed to a concrete system or other wire systems where you're having to really kind of be very rigid obviously in your construction, this allows you to be a lot more flexible in the overall construction methods. One of our other real great design advantages is that we are able to cope with almost unlimited differential settlement. So most wall systems, obviously, particularly hard systems or a concrete panel system, or even a flexible wire system, can really only tolerate a minimal amount of settlement before they have issues. Whereas Flex MSE, because of the way that the facing is interconnected, it can tolerate a huge amount of differential settlement. So from an engineering perspective, it's a great advantage. From a contracting perspective, if you're dealing with areas that have poor bearing soils, you have muddy soils, you're getting into water, whatever else, the nice thing about the Flex MSE is that it's not only highly malleable during installation, so you can resize the units, but it's also after installation, if there's any issues with differential settlement, you're not going to have any issues with the wall. We have an ASTM design rating for 120 years. This is actually based on the longevity of the geogrids that we typically use. So I should mention that if you're using a geosynthetic reinforcement, which is only good for 75 years, then the ASTM design rating will actually be limited by that. The ASTM, the longevity of the facing is actually in upwards of 2 times of that. As soon as it's vegetated, it basically gets completely stable, and then you're looking at an upwards of over 200 years in your longevity for your facing. So really, really stable, long-term facing available. And then we also mentioned that we offer a 75-year manufacturer's warranty, so that covers you against manufacturer's defect for up to 75 years. Should mention we're also the only geosynthetic system in the world with an EPD. EPD stands for Environmental Product Declaration. And for example, NZTA now requires all of the systems which are being used on their infrastructural projects to have an EPD, as does also the UK as well. So a lot of major economies are now focusing on embodied carbon in construction, which obviously infrastructure is a large portion of that. So the nice thing about Flex MSE is that it not only can be used for that, but it also can be used for LEED projects or the green building projects, or owners who are focused on creating more carbon sensitive developments as well. We use 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions versus concrete, and 1.5 versus steel, and we're 50% recycled content and 100% recyclable. One of the wonderful things from a contracting perspective, particularly versus concrete block, is that we will install in 2/3 of the time. And the primary reason for this is there's almost no base prep required. So obviously with concrete block walls, there's a fair bit of base prep required. All we require basically is a fairly level base, plate goes down on top, of that level base, bag goes on top, and you basically rinse and repeat. So it goes incredibly quickly. And we often install at either the same cost or less than other systems as well too. Talked a little bit about infrastructure. So you can see here, this is a fairly common installation. We do kind of access roads a lot of the time. We can do load-bearing roads, no problem. We can get into bigger highway structures as well too. This is actually in British Columbia, so this is roughly 38 feet in height at its maximum. And you can see we can even do cladded archways with it, and this has been hydroseeded. So you can see essentially this has a excellent growth directly onto the facing as well too. One of the really neat things about this is because it's a smaller, lightweight system, you can also get really, really close to any kind of in situ objects. So whether it's stands of old growth trees, also you can build it directly on top of rock faces, you know, depending, just as long as you can get proper footing. So there's lots of different ways you can deploy Flex MSE because of its lightweight nature. As I mentioned, we do a ton of site development, whether it's multifamily residential or private, commercial, industrial. So any areas, any low-lying areas that are subject to, you know, periodic flooding, Flex MSE is a completely free draining facing. So just as long as your backfill is also free draining, you're never going to have any issues with hydrostatic pressure building up behind the wall. So typically when you have a concrete block wall, you have to put in a lot of really expensive drainage details. You have also very specific backfill that needs to be used. But with Flex MSE, because it's a free draining facing, all of that water, which can potentially build up behind the wall during periods of inundation, actually has everywhere to go. So it basically just comes directly out of the facing itself. This is our tallest residential project to date. So this is actually 42 feet in height, so roughly 12 meters. So this is about 15,000 square feet. You can see here's the vegetative result about a year and a half later. This is actually live planted, fully irrigated. So this is a long-term memory care facility. We also do slope stability as well too, so we can get into high. This is, I would consider this also a site development solution. So, you know, very, very steep site. If you've got lots of hilly areas where there's, you know, plenty of reinforcement that has to go in for building, Flex MSE is a really great option. So this is great. This is primarily for containing erosion. This is the main reason why this is in there. But you can see it basically went back to a nice naturalized slope. Getting into smaller kind of landscaping options. So we do a ton of this. As I mentioned, this is really kind of how Flex MSE started. So we have a lot of design precedents in this neighborhood, and we're really, I would consider ourselves very contractor friendly, just because we're able to really kind of satisfy a lot of those considerations that you guys can contend with, whether it's, you know, tight site access, also getting into areas with base prep, you know, where you can't, you know, dig down too much. Also gives you really a great option, obviously, versus something like concrete. We're getting, you know, the concrete market often is quite saturated from a contractor standpoint. So a lot of customers are really looking for a green alternative, and this is a really, really strong alternative. You can see in the bottom left there's actually a rock, so you can actually integrate rock walls. You can also put it on top of a block wall if you wanted to create an architectural block finish on the bottom. Flex MSE can go on top and create a vegetated option there as well. You can see there's a few different ways it can be deployed. So this is a combination of a geogrid reinforced wall, but also gravity walls. So smaller mid-slope gravity walls can go with Flex MSE as well too. This has been live planted with like a Vinus species, which is really, really grows really lovely in the bag as well. We do a lot of golf courses. So if you guys have ever been to any, you know, really intense intense bunkers, you know, the nice thing about this is that this can turn your life into a living hell on a good golf day. You can go basically completely vertical with Flex MSE, and you can actually just sod right over it. So if you're ever involved in any kind of golf work or anything like that, this is a homeowner built wall, if you can believe it. So this homeowner built this wall in the back of his yard on basically a steep cliff face. This is kind of a blueprint for a lot of multi-use pathways as well too. So municipalities do a lot of multi-use pathways now. So we're doing smaller pathways, larger, also vehicular pathways as well too. So, and you can basically do these really nice terrace options. This is live planted with seed, which grow really spectacularly in the wall. We do a variety of different types of shapes. We can do berming as well too. So that playground is actually built on a Flex MSE berm. We can do terracing as well too. This is an architectural landmark in a municipality. And then you can see here we can do access ramps. is actually this is built directly on top of basically an exposed rock face. So the Flex MSE was actually anchored directly into it and then basically built up. And this is in a very arid area near where I am in Vancouver in the Okanagan, where we get temperatures up to 38 to 40 degrees Celsius sometimes. This is actually not an irrigated wall. This is a north-facing wall, which definitely helps in a very hot environment. You can see it's getting excellent vegetation results. One of our big maxims is anywhere land meets water. So we do residential waterways. So if you've got residential developments that are, older ones that are kind of grandfathered into, being built next to streams, but they're having issues with flooding, really, really great option for coming in and protecting the embankments. We can do a variety of different types of installations. We can do wrap walls for high scour events. And then this is actually live planted. We can also do smaller gravity walls too. This is obviously like a very low running stream, but there's lots of erosion, kind of silts coming in from the surrounding slopes. So basically just, grub the slope, put in the Flex MSE, put in, then plant it with ferns. And you can see this is after about 12 months and spectacular results. We can do terraced grass walls as well too. Really interesting project here in the UK. We do larger riverine installations as well too. So, this is it's interesting. This is actually installed as a temporary erosion control means 8 years ago on one of the largest rivers here in British Columbia, still standing today. And it took a 1 in 20-year water event within 2 weeks of completion. The nice thing about Flex MSE versus something like a bioengineering method like willow stakes or coir logs is that it has 100% of that engineered strength at the time of installation. It just gets stronger and stronger as that vegetation establishes over time. I know you guys may not see a lot of snow where you are. I know you do get it in Australia, obviously, but this is in northern Canada. These guys were working in -30. This is actually a saline lake. That's actually got twice the salinity of the Dead Sea. And they were getting excessive flooding because of all of the recent snowfall. So they had to come in and basically build this berm to protect their community center. So installed in cold weather, definitely really easy to install in pretty much any weather. Lakeshore stuff. So reclaiming lost lakeshore. This is a big part, obviously, for people with increased erosion. They're losing land a lot. You can come back and you can actually reinstate the land with the Flex MSE. This is live staked with willows. So we use willows, we use red osier dogwood as well too. So anything that you would bioengineer with or do live staking with in Australia would also work inside the system. We do low energy coastal environments as well too. So this is basically on the foreshore above the active wave zone, but they still get they were getting occasional times when the waves would actually creep up over onto the road. So they basically created a wave break with Flex MSE and a vegetated kind of little swale there. So you can see they really integrated it really nicely. This is another example of live staking. Very arid environment as well too. Live stake it, create kind of like an artificial wetland, and then basically just live stake directly into the Flex MSE. We can do bigger culverts as well too. The system is really, really remarkably resilient to inundation, so it can be overtopped. Nothing happens. We had really awful floods here a couple of years ago. That triple culvert was submerged for over 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, basically, it'd been in place for close to 10 years. At the end of the 2 weeks, water subsided, Flex MSE and the culverts were all still in place. So because of that free draining aspect and because of the vegetation, everything knitting together, there's no grouting, no concrete blocks to dislodge or anything like that or crack over time. The Flex MSE performs really, really well in those type of installations. Getting into erosion control. So shallow slope failures, erosion on roadsides. It's a really, really great way to encapsulate parent soils, basically. So if you've got an oversteepened road shoulder where you're having continuous sloughing problems, you can come in and put the Flex MSE directly on top of that. It's basically a contained revegetation medium at that point, and then you basically just hydroseed over it, and then you get excellent results. We do lots of trail projects as well too. So you can see, significant erosion here, slope failure, come in and reinstate the slope. And the nice thing about the Flex MSE is that you can actually bring it in on, small tracked equipment, and then it's really easy to kind of get in. You can kind of make it conform to those really tough to access sites. This is actually another form of erosion control, which is our mattress application. So you can actually come in, and we've done a few pilots like this, where you actually lay the bags directly on the slope and then hydroseed directly on top of it. So you get a nice even slope. And this is actually versus cellular confinement, which is like a GeoWeb. And you can see, very, very poor vegetation results. That's the Flex MSE in the background. So lots of erosion, superficial soil loss. And then with the Flex MSE, you get excellent germination. So a really, really strong revegetation component there. We can do, this is actually a small flood berm and a flood plain, and it's actually protecting a utility. So you can see they've basically completed, part of the wall. So it's actually, there's a very large drainage pipe going underneath there, and that's hydroseeded. So you can see it's getting, lots of profuse growth. Typically these are hydroseeded, but they can also be live planted as well. So there's lots of really good ways you can vegetate them. In terms of construction, so for filling, we have plans for filling jigs on the back end of the website. We also have filling videos. We're happy to help you guys, set up these filling tables as well too. Get excellent production. You can typically fill with 3 people in a skid steer, typically fill about 600 units a day. And then once you get into the more automated settings, obviously you can do closer to 1,000 to 1,500 a day. Getting into construction, this is our most common method of construction, which is basically being built as a retaining wall or a reinforced soil slope. As I mentioned before, there's almost no base prep. Plate goes down on the ground first, bags go on top. You basically you snug the snorkels, the ends together, so there's no separation there. And then basically the plate bridges the joint. Then you add your second row of bags. Then you bring in your backfill, you lay your backfill, run your compactor. You can actually run the compactor right over the bag every 2 or 3 layers, and that basically helps basically compress them. You don't have to beat them up or anything like that, pound them into oblivion or whatever else. I always tell people just leave it alone. You can walk on it to basically kind of level it out, and then you basically just add your geogrid as you go up. So typically it's every 3 courses, and then your plate just basically joins with the geogrid there, and that's that mechanical connection that I mentioned at the beginning. So, a 4-person crew, you're looking at a minimum of 20 units per man hour. So you could, you can even get even more than that. If it's a nice long straight wall, you can get closer to sort of 25 to 30 units per man hour on that installation rate. So really, really quick to install. Getting into the vegetation options, I mentioned hydroseeding. That is really by far the most common. It's really critical that the proper mulch product goes on these walls. We recommend only the use of Profile's FlexTerra product because it actually can adhere to a near vertical surface up to 6 to 8 months. You can also get up to 12 months if it's not irrigated or not in water. So, and then we also do live planting, so you can actually cut directly into the bag. You can do 3 inverted T cuts directly into the facing. And then you can also do, this person on the top right is doing what's called brush layering, which is another bioengineering technique. And live staking is very similar as well too. So you can get excellent vegetative results within 3 months with hydroseeding. Live staking can take anywhere up to kind of 18 months. So it takes a bit longer, obviously, but it really kind of depends, obviously, on what the owner is looking for. There's an example of a hydroseeded wall going in. Here's a hydroseeded and an irrigated wall. We can also irrigate the walls as well, too. So if you've got high-end clients that want it to look green all year long, you can actually put in irrigation and have that on there. And drip irrigation is by far the most efficient. So I would recommend getting that. Here's one of our CADs. Here's a really cool example of a live stake wall. Really, really spectacular. Really interesting results there. As I mentioned, you can cut directly into that bag up to 3 inverted T cuts. You only want to cut it on the top shoulder of the bag. I always tell people you don't want to cut the bottom of the bag and have issues with the bag fill coming out. So I always cut it on the top shoulder. And just kind of wrapping up a bit, if you're looking at sort of some of the advantages versus something like a concrete block system, obviously concrete block, you can go vertical, you can go near vertical. We can go within 5 degrees of vertical up to 85. So we can go much, much deeper than a wire basket system. They typically only want you to be under 70 degrees for a wire basket system. We have no problems with staining or cracking or efflorescence. And we also just get much better vegetative results than a wire basket. That's kind of considered our industry competitor, but there's a few reasons why we do better. We have much better seed to soil contact, higher percentage of organic material getting into that facing, and also it doesn't settle as well too because it's contained in the bag. It doesn't start, seeping out the bottom of the basket like it often happens. And that's basically it. So hopefully I have some time for some questions. Does anyone have any questions about the system?
Thanks, Dylan. That was very informative. Some awesome information there. If you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat. The Q&A section of this app isn't functioning properly today, so yeah. Doesn't seem like we'll have any. I think, there we go. Rod's typing a question.
The cost
Approximate cost advantages. Yeah.
So it really depends on which system you're talking about. So if we're talking about concrete block, then typically versus concrete block, we're on par. But again, you're getting into quicker installation time as well. So there's that to bear in mind, right? Versus something like a wire basket, we're probably a little bit more expensive to just from on paper, but as I mentioned, we can actually also install quicker. Versus an architectural block, there's really no comparison, and we're much less expensive. I'll leave that question to you, Mark, but I would assume you'd be able to supply for a small residential job. I know we don't turn away anybody here in Canada, so I'm assuming you guys are even more hospitable than us. So
yeah, absolutely. We'd certainly be able to have a discussion with you and understand your project requirements. But yeah, we'll certainly supply the product for those sorts of jobs.
For 1.5 meters high, you could do either geogrid or you can do what's called our gravity well tieback installation, just as long as there's no loading. I'm not quite sure, and I'm assuming 1.5 meters is your kind of municipal limits for before it needs to get into engineering.
Probably 1.2 to be fair here.
Okay. Yeah, we have that in some areas too. It varies. 1.5 then would be an engineered wall. So that would be something you'd have to basically get an engineer to stamp and also do a soils test, and then you would have reinforcement as well. Base prep for a wall, 3 bags high. So really minimal. If you're starting on swampy ground, ideally you would, dig down a bit so there's any kind of issues with, potentially erosion. But if you're just building a landscaping wall, I would literally just scrape, most of the organics off. We typically recommend doing it like a small trench if you can. Do like a 12 by 12 trench. But for a small wall like that, if it's just like a garden wall, you could literally, go down 6 inches, put your plate down, and then put the bag on, and you're done, right? And then basically the first course brings you back up to grade. This is assuming no loading. Also, I always want to preface that if there's any kind of loading involved, that everything changes, obviously. Perfect. I would say, so the one thing I would mention too, if you guys are having difficulty wrapping your heads around the vegetation piece, we have a vegetation consultation service. So happy to be a part of the conversation right away. Basically just a questionnaire, ask you about your project, what your end goals are, and then we basically work with our partners, Arbor Green, to make sure that you have good connections in terms of, sourcing what type of plants you need and whatever else, right? So we're more than happy to help with that as well.
That's great, Dylan. Thanks for that. I was actually going to ask that question about the vegetating piece because you did mention that there was a specific type of hydroseeding that's recommended. So we'd love to get more information on that when talking to customers.
Sure.
Is there any sort of collateral that you've got available on the vegetating side?
In terms of local collateral, so the vegetation piece is really very, very regional. So
Okay.
our vegetation best practices does describe obviously kind of like, you know, how to get started. But the specifics are really, we take a very project focused approach. And I always tell people, especially for smaller residential projects, the cost of hydroseeding and mobilization is actually likely more than live planting the whole wall. And when you live plant a wall, you have a much more interesting palette of plants to start using rather than just grasses. And if you're doing a smaller wall and you've got profuse growing grasses, tends to not be quite the aesthetic people are looking for. As I mentioned, like vinous species, any kind of creeping kind of plant, we tend to stay away from bunch grasses. The soil is very, very sandy, so you have to have plants in that also tolerate a sandy soil. But again, these are covered in our vegetation best practices, which you can have access to either as a contractor on the back end of our website, but Mark can also provide them. And as I mentioned, if you're getting to something a little bit more involved, we're happy to have a consultation with you as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dylan. It's good to know.
Yep.
Well, I think we've come right up to the perfect time to finish off. So we ended up getting there despite the delay getting started. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll get this recording out to everyone who registered and attended, so that can be shared around. But again, Dylan, thank you so much for taking the time to present today. Valuable information, well worth it. It's great having you.
Again, my apologies for the delay getting in. I'm not a Teams person. I'm not a Teams player. All right, thank you.
We're glad we got there in the end. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.